Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is The Dark History of Valentine's Day. Explained. You get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Dark History of Valentine's Day. Explained. Before you settle in, take a slow breath and allow the noise of the modern world to drift quietly into the distance. Tonight, we are not rushing toward bright red roses, heart-shaped chocolates, or carefully wrapped gifts. Instead, we are traveling backward through centuries of forgotten stories, dusty roads, crowded marketplaces, ancient temples, and quiet churches. We are searching for the real history behind a day that millions of people celebrate every year without ever wondering how it truly began. Imagine yourself standing in ancient Rome, long before greeting cards existed, long before bouquets filled shop windows, and long before anyone spoke of Valentine's Day as a celebration of romance. The city around you is alive with movement. Merchants call out from busy streets. The smell of fresh bread mixes with smoke rising from household fires. Soldiers march across worn stone roads while children chase one another through narrow alleyways. Somewhere in the distance, bells echo softly through the city. Life here is very different from the world you know. Love certainly exists, but it is rarely celebrated the way people celebrate it today. Marriage is often about family alliances, property, inheritance, and survival rather than personal affection. Parents frequently help decide whom their children will marry. Political influence can shape relationships just as much as genuine emotion. Yet human hearts remain surprisingly familiar. People still write poems. Young men still admire young women from across crowded gatherings. Quiet smiles are exchanged in markets. Secret promises are whispered beneath moonlit skies. Even in one of history's greatest empires, people continue searching for companionship, kindness, and hope. As evening slowly settles over Rome, another tradition quietly approaches. It is not a festival of roses. It is not filled with heart-shaped symbols. Instead, it is a celebration that feels mysterious, ancient, and sometimes unsettling to modern eyes. This festival is known as Lupercalia. For centuries, historians have debated exactly how much influence Lupercalia had on what later became Valentine's Day. Some popular stories claim it is the direct ancestor of the holiday, while many modern scholars urge greater caution. History is rarely simple, and the truth often lies somewhere between confident legends and careful evidence. What we do know is that Lupercalia was one of Rome's oldest festivals. It usually took place in the middle of February, when winter slowly began releasing its grip on the countryside. Farmers looked forward to spring. Families hoped for healthy animals, successful harvests, and growing households. Survival depended heavily upon nature, and celebrations often reflected those hopes. Picture yourself walking toward the Palatine Hill, one of Rome's famous hills where ancient traditions still linger. Nearby lies a cave that Romans believed held extraordinary significance. According to one of Rome's founding legends, this was connected to the story of Romulus and Remus, the twin brothers said to have been raised by a she-wolf before one eventually founded the city itself. Whether every Roman believed the legend exactly as it was told mattered less than what the story represented. Strength, survival, the beginning of a civilization. Priests gathered for ceremonies, connected with purification and fertility. Ancient rituals unfolded according to customs passed down through generations. These ceremonies reflected a world where religion, agriculture, politics, and everyday life blended together so completely that separating one from another was almost impossible. For the people participating, these rituals were not strange entertainment. They were part of maintaining harmony between humanity and the unseen forces believed to shape existence. The Romans were deeply religious people, although their religion looked very different from many practiced today. Gods watched over rivers, fields, households, trade, war, travel, and countless other parts of life. Every important decision could involve offerings, prayers, or ceremonies. Even successful military campaigns often depended not only on skilled generals, but also on whether divine favor seemed present. In this world, festivals reminded communities that survival depended upon cooperation between people, nature, and the gods. As generations passed, stories about Lupercalia grew more dramatic. Some later writers described young men running through parts of the city carrying strips made from sacrificed animals, gently touching people who willingly approached them, believing the ritual could bring health or fertility. Modern readers sometimes imagine scenes far more chaotic than historical evidence actually supports. Ancient sources disagree with one another, and historians continue examining exactly how these ceremonies unfolded. History often resists simple answers. It invites patience. It rewards curiosity. The further we travel into the past, the more carefully we must separate evidence from assumptions. Now imagine centuries passing quietly. Empires rise. Emperors fall. Roads stretch farther across Europe. Trade expands. New philosophies spread. Religious beliefs slowly change. The mighty Roman Empire, once devoted to many gods, gradually begins transforming under the influence of Christianity. This transformation does not happen overnight. Entire generations live through gradual change. Some ancient customs disappear quickly, others survive by adapting. Still, others become memories, preserved only in scattered writings. The Christian Church now faces an enormous challenge. Across vast territories, millions of people still remember older traditions. Some festivals remain deeply woven into local culture. Rather than changing every custom immediately, religious leaders often guide communities through long periods of adjustment. Some traditions fade naturally, others receive new meanings, others disappear almost entirely. It is within this changing world that the name Valentine begins appearing. Almost immediately, history becomes surprisingly complicated. Many people imagine there was one single Saint Valentine whose life clearly explains the holiday celebrated today. Reality is far less certain. Early Christian history includes several martyrs named Valentine. Ancient records are incomplete. Some documents contradict others. Legends grew over centuries. Facts and storytelling gradually intertwined until separating one from the other became extremely difficult. One tradition speaks of a priest living during the reign of Emperor Claudius II in the 3rd century. According to later accounts, the emperor believed unmarried soldiers fought more effectively than married ones. Whether he actually issued a sweeping ban on marriage remains uncertain, and historians debate the historical evidence. The famous story says that Valentine secretly performed Christian marriages despite imperial orders. Eventually he was arrested, imprisoned, and executed. It is a powerful story. It speaks of courage, faith, and loyalty. Yet historians continue asking careful questions. Which parts come from reliable contemporary evidence? Which parts appeared generations later? Which details reflect genuine history? Which belong to legend? The honest answer is that certainty remains elusive, and that uncertainty itself is part of the fascination. Real history rarely arrives wrapped in perfect certainty. Instead, it resembles a mosaic assembled from countless small fragments. Some pieces fit beautifully. Others remain missing forever. As you continue this quiet journey through time, perhaps that uncertainty becomes strangely comforting. Not every mystery needs immediate resolution. Sometimes the search itself reveals more than the final answer. Imagine the quiet stone walls of a Roman prison. A small window allows faint afternoon light to enter. Outside, ordinary life continues. Merchants continue bargaining. Children continue laughing. Birds continue crossing the sky. Inside, according to one enduring tradition, Valentine spends his final days encouraging fellow believers and remaining faithful despite knowing his fate. Another later legend tells of a jailer's daughter whose blindness was miraculously healed. Still another claims Valentine signed a farewell message, ending with words that generations later transformed into one of history's most famous expressions. From your Valentine. Whether those exact words were ever written remains impossible to prove. Yet legends often reveal something important, even when every detail cannot be historically confirmed. They show what later generations hoped to remember. They reveal the values people admired: faith, compassion, sacrifice, hope. These qualities mattered deeply to communities preserving the memory of early Christian martyrs. As centuries quietly continue flowing forward, Europe itself changes again. Kingdoms replace empires. Castles rise across rolling hills. Monasteries preserve ancient manuscripts by candlelight. Pilgrims walk hundreds of miles seeking holy places. Farmers continue planting fields according to familiar seasons. Life remains difficult. Disease appears without warning. Harvests sometimes fail. Winter brings hardship. Yet amid uncertainty, communities continue gathering for festivals, marking the passing year. By now, February has become associated with more than changing weather. It carries echoes of older Roman customs, memories of Christian saints, and growing traditions that vary from one region to another. No one yet imagines enormous shops filled with Valentine's decorations. No one expects bouquets delivered across cities. No one posts declarations of love online. The celebration, whatever form it takes, remains deeply connected to local culture and evolving religious life. The story is only beginning. And as the centuries unfold, poets, kings, writers, merchants, artists, and ordinary people will gradually reshape Valentine's Day into something that neither ancient Romans nor early Christians could ever have imagined. The quiet path through history stretches onward, carrying us gently toward medieval Europe, where ideas about courtly love, romance, devotion, and destiny will begin transforming an obscure feast day into one of the world's most recognizable celebrations. As the centuries continue to drift quietly past, the world begins changing in ways that few people living in ancient Rome could ever have imagined. Stone temples slowly lose their importance, while towering churches become the centers of community life. Latin remains the language of scholars and clergy, yet across villages and kingdoms, countless local languages grow stronger with each passing generation. The Roman Empire has faded, but its influence still lingers beneath roads, laws, and traditions that continue shaping everyday life. Imagine yourself waking before sunrise in a small medieval village somewhere in Europe. A thin layer of mist hangs above the fields. The air feels cool and damp, carrying the earthy scent of fresh soil mixed with smoke rising from simple wooden homes. Roosters announce the coming morning long before the first rays of sunlight reach the rooftops. Life here is slow. Every season determines what people eat, how they work, and whether their families will remain healthy through the coming winter. Most people never travel far from the place where they were born. News from distant kingdoms may take weeks or even months to arrive, carried by merchants, wandering pilgrims, or traveling monks. The world feels both enormous and wonderfully small. In such communities, festivals become precious moments that break the rhythm of daily labor. Religious feast days bring families together. Bells ring across villages. Markets become busier than usual. People share meals whenever circumstances allow. Children laugh more freely. Even those burdened by difficult lives find brief moments of comfort among neighbors. By this time, the feast of Saint Valentine exists within the Christian calendar, but it is still far removed from the holiday familiar today. For most ordinary people, the day is simply one among many commemorations, honoring saints whose lives are remembered for their faith and sacrifice. No flowers wrapped in decorative paper, no heart-shaped boxes filled with sweets, no elaborate traditions centered entirely around romance. Instead, the memory of Saint Valentine rests quietly among countless other saints whose names fill church calendars throughout the year. Yet history has a curious habit of allowing small ideas to grow into something much larger than anyone could predict. Far away from quiet villages, medieval monasteries preserve knowledge that might otherwise disappear forever. Candlelight flickers across handwritten manuscripts as patient scribes spend countless hours copying texts, one careful letter at a time. Their work demands extraordinary concentration. A single mistake can require scraping away ink and beginning again. Imagine the silence inside one of these monasteries. Only the soft scratching of quills breaks the stillness. Outside, the wind brushes gently against ancient stone walls. Somewhere in the distance, church bells echo across rolling hills. Within these peaceful rooms, history survives because generations of monks believe that preserving knowledge is itself an act of devotion. Among the works they copy are religious writings, histories, poetry, philosophy, and classical literature inherited from earlier civilizations. Many stories that survived into the modern world owe their existence to these quiet rooms. Without them, countless voices from antiquity might have vanished forever. Meanwhile, medieval Europe begins developing new ideas about love. Not the practical arrangements that often guided marriage among ordinary families, but an idealized vision celebrated through songs and poetry. This growing tradition becomes known today as courtly love. It is important to remember that courtly love was not necessarily an accurate reflection of everyday relationships. Instead, it was a literary tradition shaped by poets who imagined noble knights performing extraordinary acts of courage and devotion for women they admired. These stories painted love as noble, patient, respectful, sometimes impossible. A knight might dedicate years of loyal service to a lady he could never marry. His devotion becomes less about possession and more about honor, self-discipline, and admiration. Modern readers sometimes mistake these poems for descriptions of ordinary medieval life. Historians urge caution. Real marriages remained deeply connected to family interests, inheritance, political alliances, and economic security. Romantic affections certainly existed. People laughed together. They grieved together. They raised children. They missed loved ones separated by war or travel. But literature often presented an ideal rather than everyday reality. Still, ideals possess remarkable power. They shape dreams. They influence expectations. Over generations, they slowly transform culture itself. Imagine an evening inside the great hall of a medieval castle. The day's work has ended. Fires crackle warmly beneath large stone chimneys. Candles cast soft golden light across wooden tables where nobles gather after supper. A traveling minstrel enters carrying a lute. Conversation gradually quiets. Music begins. The melodies drift gently through the hall as stories unfold. Not tales of merchants balancing accounts or farmers harvesting grain, but stories of brave knights, distant kingdoms, impossible quests, an enduring love that survives every hardship. Listeners lean forward. For a little while, everyday worries fade. These performances entertain, certainly, but they also teach ideals about courage, loyalty, generosity, and devotion. the image of love slowly becomes richer, more poetic, more symbolic. Although Saint Valentine's feast day remains relatively modest, the cultural landscape surrounding ideas of romance is quietly changing. Then, during the 14th century, another important figure enters our story. Imagine England during the lifetime of Geoffrey Chaucer. The countryside stretches beneath changing skies. Castles overlook rivers winding through green valleys. London grows steadily busier as trade expands. Plague has recently devastated populations across Europe, leaving lasting scars upon entire generations. Yet creativity continues. Poets write, artists paint, builders construct magnificent cathedrals, scholars debate philosophy. Human imagination refuses to disappear even during difficult times. Chaucer becomes one of England's most influential writers. His poetry captures humor, humanity, observation, and remarkable insight into everyday people. Among his works appears a poem often connected with the growing association between Saint Valentine's Day and romantic love. In Parliament of Fools, written around the late 14th century, birds gather on Saint Valentine's Day to choose their mates. To modern readers, this may sound charmingly familiar. Yet historians remind us to avoid assuming this single poem suddenly created Valentine's Day as we know it. History rarely changes through one event alone. Instead, countless influences overlap. Religious traditions, seasonal customs, literary imagination, local celebrations. Gradually, these separate threads begin weaving together. Still, Chaucer's work represents one of the earliest surviving literary connections between Saint Valentine and courtship. Whether readers immediately embrace the idea is difficult to measure. Books remained rare. Most people could not read. Poetry spread slowly through noble households before reaching wider audiences. Nevertheless, ideas possess extraordinary patience. They travel quietly from generation to generation. Sometimes centuries pass before their greatest influence becomes visible. Imagine a young noblewoman listening as someone reads Chaucer aloud. She smiles gently at the playful image of birds selecting companions. Perhaps she remembers the verses months later. Perhaps she shares them with friends. Perhaps another poet hears the story and creates something new. History often moves exactly this way. Not through sudden revolutions alone, but through conversations, songs, stories. Small moments that quietly echo far beyond the lives of those who first experienced them. Meanwhile, ordinary people continue living lives shaped more by practical necessity than romantic fantasy. A farmer rises before dawn. A blacksmith repairs tools worn by constant use. A baker kneads dough while the village remains asleep. Children help gather firewood. Women spin wool beside windows, catching precious daylight. The rhythm of survival leaves little time for grand declarations of affection, yet love appears in quieter forms. A husband returning safely after months away. A mother comforting a frightened child during winter storms. Neighbors sharing food when harvests fail. An elderly couple sitting silently together after decades of shared hardship. History often remembers kings, battles, and famous poets. But countless ordinary acts of kindness disappear without record. That does not make them less real. If anything, they formed the invisible foundation upon which every civilization stood. As Europe moves toward the 15th century, handwritten letters begin carrying expressions of affection more frequently among those fortunate enough to write. These are not yet the printed Valentine's cards familiar today. Each letter requires time, ink, careful handwriting, expensive materials. Receiving such a message is meaningful precisely because creating it demands genuine effort. Words travel slowly. Sometimes they arrive weeks after being written. Sometimes they never arrive at all. Distance feels much greater than it does in the modern world. Imagine waiting beside a castle gate for news from someone far away. Every approaching rider raises hope. Every unfamiliar face brings disappointment. Communication itself becomes an emotional experience. Perhaps this helps explain why written expressions of affection carry such lasting significance. When words are difficult to send, they become more precious. As the late Middle Ages unfold, Saint Valentine's Day gradually acquires stronger associations with romance in parts of Europe. Not everywhere, not all at once. Traditions vary enormously between regions. Some communities scarcely notice the feast. Others begin developing local customs involving admiration, friendship, or courtship. History continues moving gently, never in perfectly straight lines. The Valentine's Day recognized today still lies centuries ahead. Printing presses have yet to transform communication. Industrial factories have not begun producing cards. Chocolate remains unfamiliar to most Europeans. Flowers are admired for their beauty rather than marketed as symbols of a global holiday. Yet beneath these differences, something important has begun. The memory of a largely mysterious saint has quietly merged with poetry, seasonal renewal, and humanity's timeless desire to express affection. Without anyone fully realizing it, the foundation of a future worldwide tradition is slowly taking shape, and our quiet journey through history continues onward toward an age when handwritten messages, royal correspondence, and the invention of printing will begin turning scattered customs into celebrations shared by ever greater numbers of people. The morning arrives almost unnoticed, as it often did in the medieval world. A pale light slowly stretches across fields, still damp with dew, while the first sounds of daily life begin to replace the deep silence of night. Somewhere, a church bell rings softly, inviting the faithful to morning prayers. Farmers prepare their tools. Bakers place fresh loaves into warm ovens. Merchants begin arranging their goods beneath wooden stalls. Another ordinary day has quietly begun. If you were standing in one of these towns, you would probably never imagine that the customs surrounding Saint Valentine's Day would one day become one of the world's most recognized celebrations. To those living here, history always feels like the present. No one knows which traditions will survive. No one can predict which stories future generations will remember. The people simply live their lives, unaware that their quiet customs are becoming threads in a much larger tapestry. As Europe enters the 15th century, something remarkable begins changing. Not because people's hearts suddenly become more romantic than those of earlier generations. Human emotions have always existed. Rather, new ways of preserving thoughts begin allowing those emotions to travel farther than ever before. Imagine sitting beside a window inside a noble household. Outside, gentle rain falls across the courtyard, tapping softly against the stone walls. Inside, a young woman carefully unfolds a handwritten letter. The parchment carries the unmistakable scent of ink and wax. Every line has been written by hand. Every word required patience. There are no instant messages, no telephones, no photographs. Only carefully chosen words. Perhaps the letter speaks of admiration. Perhaps it carries news from someone serving in a distant court. Perhaps it simply wishes the reader good health until they meet again. To modernize, the language may seem formal, yet beneath its careful phrasing lies something deeply familiar. The desire to remain connected, the hope that someone far away still remembers you. It is easy to forget how precious writing once was. Today we can send thousands of words across the world in seconds, without giving the process much thought. In the medieval world, every written page represented hours of labor. Paper remained expensive. Ink had to be prepared. Pens required constant sharpening. Literacy itself was a valuable skill not shared by everyone. Receiving a personal letter was often an event worth remembering. Among the earliest surviving Valentine's messages is one written during a time of great uncertainty. In 1415, Charles, Duke of Orleans, found himself imprisoned in England after the Battle of Agincourt. Separated from his homeland and uncertain about his future, he composed poems while in captivity. One of those poems contains words addressed to his wife, referring to her as his very gentle Valentine. It is one of the oldest surviving examples connecting Saint Valentine's Day with romantic affection through a personal message. Imagine the quiet room where those words were written. Outside guards continue their routine. The seasons pass beyond narrow windows. Months become years. Captivity brings loneliness, unlike anything most people experience. Writing becomes more than communication. It becomes companionship, hope preserved on paper. Whether Charles imagined future generations reading his poem hardly matters. He was writing for one person. Yet history sometimes preserves the most personal moments in unexpected ways. Across Europe, similar expressions gradually become more common among the educated classes. Poetry flourishes, songs celebrate admiration, stories describe faithful lovers overcoming impossible obstacles. Romance increasingly becomes a subject worthy of literature. Still, daily life remains challenging for ordinary families. Imagine a young couple preparing for marriage in a small village. Their future depends less upon grand declarations than upon practical questions. Can they afford a home? Will the harvest be successful? Will their families approve? Can they survive another difficult winter? Love and responsibility are closely intertwined. Marriage often represents not only emotional commitment, but also economic cooperation. Together, two people share fields, livestock, household duties, and the raising of children. Affection grows through countless small acts repeated over years. Helping with difficult work, sharing scarce food, caring during illness, remaining loyal through hardship. Perhaps these quieter forms of love deserve as much admiration as the dramatic romances celebrated by poets. History rarely records them, yet they shaped millions of lives. As the 15th century slowly gives way to the 16th, Europe experiences another transformation whose importance can hardly be overstated. Imagine entering the workshop of Johannes Gutenberg. The room smells of metal, oil, and fresh ink. Heavy presses stand ready. Small pieces of movable type rest in neat rows. Workers move carefully between tables, arranging letters with astonishing precision. For centuries, books required endless copying by hand. Now, something extraordinary becomes possible. Words can be reproduced again and again. Ideas can spread faster than ever before. Knowledge slowly becomes more accessible. The invention of movable type printing does not transform society overnight. Change remains gradual. Books are still valuable. Literacy still develops slowly. Yet the direction of history has shifted. Printed materials begin reaching audiences unimaginable only a few generations earlier. Religious texts spread, scientific ideas circulate. Poetry finds new readers. Stories travel across kingdoms. Eventually, printed Valentine's greetings will emerge from this technological revolution. But that future still waits patiently beyond the horizon. For now, printing quietly lays the foundation. Imagine countless readers encountering similar poems in different towns, separated by hundreds of miles. Ideas once confined to one region now begin traveling across Europe. The language of romance becomes increasingly familiar. Seasonal customs evolve. Communities borrow traditions from one another. History resembles a river gathering countless streams. No single source explains everything. Instead, many influences flow together until separating them becomes almost impossible. During these centuries, another powerful force continues shaping European life: religion. Churches remain central to nearly every community. Their bells regulate daily routines. Their calendars organize the year. Their festivals bring people together. Saints continue serving as examples of faith, endurance, compassion, and sacrifice. The feast of Saint Valentine remains primarily a religious observance. Its romantic associations grow quietly, alongside rather than replacing its spiritual origins. This balance is important. Modern celebrations often emphasize love between couples. Earlier generations frequently understood saints through very different lenses. Their focus rested upon devotion, courage, and moral example. Only gradually do literary traditions begin surrounding Valentine's feast with themes of courtship and affection. Imagine attending a church service on February 14th, sometime during the late Middle Ages. The building feels cool beneath high stone ceilings. Colored light filters softly through stained glass windows. Candles flicker gently. voices rise together in prayer. Nothing about the service resembles the commercial holiday familiar centuries later. No decorations shaped like hearts. No advertisements, no elaborate displays encouraging purchases. Only quiet worship. Outside the church, however, local customs continue evolving. Young people exchange playful verses. Friends compose poems. Some communities begin choosing symbolic valentines through games or seasonal traditions. Each region develops its own variations. Some disappear within a generation. Others survive long enough to influence future customs. History is wonderfully unpredictable. Many traditions we consider ancient are surprisingly recent. Others that truly are ancient have almost entirely vanished. The ones that survive often do so because each generation quietly reshapes them to fit changing times. As Europe approaches the Renaissance, curiosity about human experience grows stronger. Artists study nature with fresh attention. Writers explore emotion with increasing depth. Painters capture expressions that feel astonishingly alive even centuries later. Human relationships become richer subjects for creative imagination. Love itself acquires new layers of meaning, not merely duty, not merely family obligation, but companionship, conversation, shared joy, mutual admiration. These ideas do not suddenly replace older customs. Instead, they slowly join them, like new colors added to an already beautiful painting. Imagine walking through Florence during the Renaissance. The streets buzz gently with craftsmen shaping marble, mixing pigments, binding books, and creating objects of extraordinary beauty. Ideas travel alongside merchants. Art inspires literature. Literature inspires music. Music inspires poetry. Culture becomes increasingly interconnected. Although Saint Valentine's Day remains relatively modest compared with major religious festivals, the cultural environment surrounding love has changed profoundly. Romantic expression has become more acceptable. Poetry flourishes. Letters multiply. Songs celebrate affection in countless forms. The stage is quietly being prepared for something entirely new. Yet beneath every poem, every letter, and every story lies an enduring truth. People have always longed to be remembered, to know that someone thinks kindly of them, to believe that affection can survive distance, hardship, and time itself. Perhaps that universal longing explains why Valentine's Day eventually crossed borders, languages, and centuries. Its symbols changed, its customs evolved, its meanings expanded, but the human heart remained remarkably constant. As evening gently settles over Renaissance Europe, candles begin glowing behind countless windows. Families gather for simple meals. Travelers seek shelter before darkness deepens. Somewhere a young poet carefully chooses words for someone they admire. Elsewhere, an elderly couple shares quiet conversation after decades together. History moves onward, slowly, patiently, and with every passing century, the celebration of Saint Valentine draws a little closer to the holiday recognized around the world today. The greatest transformation, however, has not yet arrived. Printing presses will soon produce messages by the thousands. New discoveries across oceans will reshape global trade. Chocolate, flowers, and beautifully crafted cards will eventually become part of the tradition. The story of Valentine's Day is only beginning to enter the modern world. As the 16th century gradually gives way to the 17th, Europe feels both familiar and entirely transformed. Kingdoms continue to rise and fall. Explorers return with astonishing stories from distant shores, and merchants carry unfamiliar goods across continents that had once seemed unimaginably far apart. Every generation inherits an older world while quietly creating a new one. Imagine yourself walking through the narrow streets of London on a crisp February morning. The city is awake long before sunrise. Wooden houses lean slightly over winding streets. Shopkeepers carefully lift heavy shutters from their storefronts. Horses pull carts loaded with grain, cloth, timber, and barrels of ale. The air carries the scent of smoke from hundreds of fireplaces, mixed with damp earth after a night of gentle rain. People hurry toward their daily work. Some are apprentices learning trades that will support them for life. Others are merchants hoping for profitable sales. Children weave through the crowds with surprising confidence, accustomed to the busy rhythm of city life. Somewhere nearby, the steady sound of a printing press echoes from a workshop. That sound may not seem remarkable, yet it is quietly changing history. Each pull of the heavy press creates another page, another poem, another prayer, another story. Knowledge no longer travels only at the speed of a horse or the memory of a storyteller. It now moves through ink, through paper, through books that can reach readers living hundreds of miles apart. For Valentine's traditions, this gradual spread of printed words becomes deeply important. Ideas about love no longer remain confined to royal courts or wealthy households. Poems can be copied. Collections of verses can be printed. Expressions of affection become easier to share. The language of romance slowly reaches a wider audience than ever before. Imagine a young man entering a small bookshop. He has little money. Buying an entire book represents a considerable expense, yet he lingers near a collection of poems. Perhaps he hopes to borrow a few beautiful lines. Perhaps he wishes to impress someone he quietly admires. Words have become gifts in their own right. Not because they are expensive, but because they express feelings that are often difficult to speak aloud. Long before colorful greeting cards filled shop windows, handwritten verses remained among the most meaningful ways to communicate affection. Every sentence reflected thought. Every carefully chosen phrase carried intention. There were no ready-made messages, no printed rhymes waiting inside folded cards. If someone wished to express admiration, they usually had to find the words themselves. Perhaps that is why many of these early messages feel surprisingly sincere, even centuries later. They were created for one reader, one heart, one relationship. Imagine a quiet evening beside a candle. The flame dances gently as someone pauses over a blank sheet of paper. The first sentence proves the hardest. How does one describe affection honestly? How much should be revealed? How much should remain hidden? The writer scratches out one line, begins another, stops again. The silence grows comfortable. Outside, winter winds brush softly against wooden shutters. Inside, emotions slowly become words. It is a scene that countless generations have experienced. Although technology changes, the challenge remains wonderfully familiar. Finding the right words has never been easy. As Europe continues changing, literacy gradually becomes more common, though it still remains far from universal. Schools slowly expand. Universities attract increasing numbers of students. Books become more available. Ideas travel farther. The written word gains remarkable influence over everyday life. This expanding world of reading and writing also shapes the meaning of Saint Valentine's Day. The celebration begins shifting, almost imperceptibly, from being remembered primarily through church calendars toward becoming associated with personal expressions of affection. Not everywhere, not immediately. History almost never moves in straight lines. Different regions preserve different customs. Some communities continue observing the feast as a religious occasion with little emphasis on romance. Others embrace growing literary traditions connecting the day with admiration and courtship. Both realities exist at the same time. The complexity is one reason historians remain cautious whenever simple explanations appear. You may have heard the popular claim that Valentine's Day has always been a celebration of romantic love. In truth, it has not. The holiday evolved slowly across many centuries. Its meaning expanded because countless people in countless places gradually added new traditions without entirely abandoning older ones. History is less like flipping a page. It is more like watching sunrise. At first, the darkness hardly seems to change. Then colors begin appearing along the horizon. Eventually, without noticing the exact moment, daylight fills the landscape. Valentine's Day followed much the same pattern. No single year transformed everything. Instead, each generation contributed a small piece. Imagine now the homes of ordinary families during these centuries. Most people still live modest lives. Furniture remains simple. Meals depend heavily upon local harvests. Winter evenings are long. Candles are valuable. Families spend hours together, talking, sewing, repairing clothing, preparing tools, or simply resting after difficult days of labor. Stories become entertainment. Grandparents share memories. Travelers describe distant cities. Children listen with wide eyes. Many stories concern heroes, others concern saints. Some speak of miraculous events. Others tell gentle tales of faithful lovers separated by circumstance before finding happiness once more. These stories shape expectations about love as surely as any formal lesson. They teach patience, kindness, loyalty, forgiveness, qualities that remain timeless regardless of century. As the 17th century unfolds, Europe also experiences periods of conflict, political upheaval, and religious division. Wars interrupt ordinary life. A disease continues appearing without warning. Entire communities face uncertainty. Yet remarkably, people continue writing poetry. They continue marrying. They continue celebrating births. They continue believing that hope deserves a place beside hardship. This balance between sorrow and joy appears throughout history. Even during humanity's darkest moments, people continue planting gardens, composing music, writing letters, holding hands. The human heart has always possessed extraordinary resilience. Imagine a soldier stationed far from home. Winter settles across the countryside. Snow covers fields where crops will eventually return. The evenings are cold and quiet. He thinks about family, friends, someone waiting many miles away. Perhaps he writes a letter. Perhaps he cannot write at all, and instead asks another soldier for help. The letter travels slowly. Weeks may pass before it reaches its destination. Yet when it finally arrives, it carries more than ink upon paper. It carries presence, memory, connection. Long before modern communication, letters became bridges across distance. Valentine's traditions gradually absorbed this beautiful idea. A written message could preserve affection even when two people remained separated by impossible miles. Not every Valentine celebrated romance. Some expressed friendship. Others conveyed respect. Some simply wished another person peace and good health. The holiday's meaning remained broader than modern assumptions sometimes suggest. During these centuries, symbols also begin evolving. Flowers have always carried beauty, but different blossoms gradually acquire symbolic meanings. Roses increasingly become associated with love because of their beauty, fragrance, and long connection with classical mythology and poetry. Birds continue appearing in literature as symbols of courtship, echoing ideas that had circulated since Chaucer's time. Hearts slowly become more recognizable artistic motifs, though not yet the universal emblem they would later become. Each symbol develops gradually. None appears fully formed. Like the holiday itself, they grow through countless small changes spread across generations. Imagine an artist illuminating the margin of a manuscript. Tiny flowers surround decorative letters. Small birds perch among curling vines. Two figures exchange respectful glances beneath flowering branches. These images seem simple, yet together they help create the visual language that future centuries will immediately recognize. Art often prepares the imagination long before society realizes what is happening. By the late 17th century, the Feast of Saint Valentine has become a fascinating blend of memory, faith, literature, seasonal expectation, and growing romantic symbolism. Its ancient origins have not disappeared. Its Christian associations remain meaningful. Its literary traditions continue expanding. All these layers exist simultaneously. Perhaps that is why the holiday has endured for so long. It speaks to different people in different ways. Some see devotion, others see friendship. Others celebrate lifelong partnership, others simply appreciate the opportunity to remind someone that they are valued. As another quiet February evening settles across Europe, candles glow behind countless windows. Once again, somewhere a poet searches for the perfect ending to a verse. Elsewhere, a young woman carefully folds a handwritten letter before sealing it with warm wax. A family shares laughter around a modest supper. An elderly monk copies another page of a manuscript, preserving knowledge for generations he will never meet. None of them can imagine what lies ahead. The Industrial Revolution, mass printing, cheap postage, commercial greeting cards, boxes of chocolate, fresh bouquets delivered to doorsteps. These remarkable changes remain just beyond the horizon. And with them, Valentine's Day will undergo its greatest transformation yet, changing from a modest seasonal tradition into a celebration recognized across much of the world. The 18th century arrives so quietly that almost no one notices history turning another page. There is no single morning when the world suddenly feels modern. Instead, change comes softly, almost like the first hint of spring after a long winter. One generation teaches the next. Traditions are passed from parents to children, and slowly, almost invisibly, society begins to transform. Imagine standing beside a country road just after sunrise. A light mist still clings to the fields. Horses pull wagons loaded with grain toward the nearest town. Farmers exchange greetings as they begin another day's work. Birds circle high above the hedgerows, singing songs that sound much the same as they did centuries before. Nature has not changed very much. People, however, are beginning to change. Across Europe, towns continue growing. Trade becomes increasingly active. Roads improve. Ships connect distant ports with remarkable regularity. Goods that once seemed unimaginably rare now travel across oceans. Among those goods is something that most medieval Europeans could scarcely have imagined. Chocolate. Its story begins thousands of miles away in Central America, where ancient civilizations such as the Maya and the Aztec valued cacao far differently than people do today. Their chocolate was often consumed as a bitter drink, sometimes mixed with spices rather than sugar. When Europeans first encountered cacao, they gradually adapted it to their own tastes. Sugar became more widely available, recipes changed. Chocolate slowly evolved into a luxurious drink enjoyed by wealthy households. At first, it remained expensive, far beyond the reach of ordinary families. But history has a remarkable habit of making rare things common. As production expanded and trade networks grew, chocolate slowly became more accessible. Centuries later, it would become one of Valentine's Day's most recognizable gifts. No one could yet predict that future. Still, the first quiet steps had already begun. Imagine entering an elegant drawing room in 18th century London. A fire burns gently inside a polished fireplace. Guests gather around small tables, speaking softly about literature, politics, travel, and philosophy. Fine porcelain cups rest carefully upon polished wood. Warm chocolate is served. It is rich, comforting, almost luxurious. Conversation flows easily. Outside, winter lingers in the streets. Inside, a warmth creates an atmosphere where friendships deepen and relationships quietly grow. It is easy to understand why chocolate gradually became associated with comfort, affection, and celebration. Not because of a single tradition, but because people naturally connect pleasant experiences with meaningful moments. Around the same time, flowers begin carrying increasingly detailed symbolic meanings. People have admired flowers throughout history. Ancient Egyptians decorated ceremonies with blossoms. Romans celebrated gardens. Medieval monasteries cultivated herbs and flowering plants. Yet during the 18th century, the language of flowers begins becoming especially fashionable. Different flowers communicate different emotions. A red rose suggests deep affection. White blossoms often symbolize purity. Forget-me-nots quietly express remembrance. Violets may suggest modesty or faithfulness. These meanings are never entirely universal. They vary between regions and generations. Still, flowers become silent messengers. Imagine a young man walking through a garden just before dawn. Tiny drops of dew shimmer upon delicate petals. He carefully chooses one perfect bloom. Not the largest, not the brightest. Simply the one that reminds him of someone special. He offers it later that day without many words. None are necessary. Sometimes beauty speaks for itself. Human beings have always searched for ways to express emotions that seem larger than language. Flowers become one answer. Poetry becomes another. Music another still. Valentine's Day gradually gathers all these expressions together, not through careful planning. Simply because people enjoy sharing beauty with those they care about. Meanwhile, another remarkable transformation quietly unfolds. Postal systems improve. For much of history, sending a personal letter required enormous patience. Delivery remained uncertain. Travel could be dangerous. Roads were unreliable. Now communication becomes steadily more dependable. Letters begin connecting families, friends, and sweethearts, separated by growing distances. Imagine waiting beside the window each afternoon. A rider approaches, carrying a leather satchel filled with correspondence. Perhaps today there will be a letter. Perhaps not. Hope itself becomes part of the ritual. When an envelope finally arrives bearing familiar handwriting, the entire day changes. Someone remembered. Someone cared enough to write. The paper itself becomes precious. Many people read cherished letters again and again. Some carefully fold them away inside wooden boxes. Others carry them while traveling. These handwritten messages often survive decades longer than the people who first exchanged them. Today, historians treasure such letters because they reveal everyday emotions that official records rarely preserve. Kings leave treaties. Governments leave laws. Ordinary people leave letters. Those letters remind us that history is ultimately built from individual lives. As the Enlightenment spreads across Europe, philosophers encourage reason, observation, and curiosity. Scientific discoveries reshape understanding of the natural world. Astronomers study the heavens. Naturalists classify plants and animals. Inventors imagine machines that will eventually transform industry. Yet despite extraordinary intellectual progress, poetry never disappears. Neither does love. Knowledge expands. The heart remains wonderfully familiar. Imagine attending a small musical gathering one winter evening. A violin begins playing softly. Guests speak in quiet voices. Candles reflect gently from polished glass. Somewhere across the room, two people exchange a brief smile. Nothing dramatic happens. No grand declaration. No theatrical performance. Simply a shared moment. History contains countless moments exactly like this. Most leave no written record. Yet they are no less real. Perhaps the greatest mistake we sometimes make is imagining that people in earlier centuries felt emotions differently than we do. They did not. They experienced hope, loneliness, joy, regret, affection, fear, gratitude. The circumstances surrounding their lives differed enormously. Their hearts did not. As the 18th century approaches its close, newspapers become increasingly common. Printing technology continues improving. Books become less expensive. Literacy rises gradually. Ideas spread faster than ever before. Although commercially produced Valentine's cards still remain relatively uncommon, the conditions necessary for their future success are quietly falling into place. Paper becomes more available. Printing becomes more efficient. Postal services become increasingly reliable. Growing numbers of people can read and write. History often resembles preparing fertile soil long before planting seeds. The spectacular bloom appears later, but invisible work begins much earlier. Imagine a printer carefully arranging tiny metal letters into a wooden frame. Each character must be placed backwards. Every line requires patience. When ink covers the finished type and paper is pressed against it, dozens of identical pages emerge. For the first time in history, beautifully printed verses can be reproduced in large numbers. Poetry that once belonged to a single manuscript can now reach hundreds or even thousands of readers. The written celebration of affection becomes easier than ever before. Still, handwritten words continue carrying unique emotional power. Even today, many people treasure handwritten notes more than printed messages, perhaps because handwriting contains something deeply personal. Each curve, each pause, each tiny imperfection reminds us that another human hand once rested exactly there. By the close of the 18th century, Valentine's Day has traveled an extraordinary journey. Its ancient Roman background remains a distant echo. Its Christian history still shapes its identity. Medieval poetry has enriched its meaning. Renaissance art has expanded its symbolism, and improved printing and communication are preparing it for an entirely new era. The holiday now stands quietly at the edge of enormous change. The 19th century waits just beyond the horizon. Factories will begin producing beautifully decorated Valentine's cards in astonishing numbers. Railways will carry mail farther and faster than ever before. Affordable postage will encourage millions to exchange greetings. Love itself will become part of a rapidly expanding commercial world. Some will celebrate this transformation. Others will worry that sincere emotions risk becoming products for sale. That debate, too, will become part of Valentine's long and fascinating history. For now, however, evening settles peacefully once more. The last light fades behind distant hills. Candles glow softly inside warm homes. Somewhere another letter is carefully folded. Another flower is gently placed between the pages of a cherished book. Another quiet promise is whispered beneath a winter sky. History continues its gentle journey, carrying Saint Valentine's Day ever closer to the celebration recognized across the modern world. The 19th century does not arrive with fanfare. There are no trumpets announcing that the world is about to change forever. Instead, another winter quietly passes into spring. Another generation grows older, and another group of children begins seeing the world through fresh eyes. Yet beneath this peaceful rhythm, one of history's greatest transformations is already unfolding. Imagine standing beside a railway platform on a cold February morning. A thick blanket of mist hangs over the tracks. Suddenly, somewhere in the distance, a whistle breaks the silence. A steam locomotive slowly appears, breathing clouds of white vapor into the crisp air. Iron wheels roll steadily across polished rails as passengers prepare to begin journeys that would have seemed almost impossible only a century earlier. Distance is beginning to lose its power. For thousands of years, sending a letter meant trusting horses, sailing ships, or weary travelers crossing muddy roads. Communication moved only as fast as people could travel. Now the world is becoming smaller, not because continents have moved, but because people can reach one another more quickly than ever before. This quiet revolution changes nearly every part of daily life. Families separated by work can remain connected. Businesses expand beyond local towns. Newspapers carry yesterday's events across entire countries. And slowly, almost unnoticed at first, Valentine's Day begins changing with them. Imagine entering a busy printing workshop somewhere in Victorian England. The room is alive with movement. Heavy presses rise and fall with rhythmic precision. Stacks of fresh paper wait beside bottles of dark ink. Craftsmen carefully inspect beautifully engraved illustrations. The scent of paper, ink, glue, and polished wood fills the air. Unlike earlier centuries, these printers are no longer producing only books and newspapers. They are creating something entirely new. Decorative greeting cards, some are simple, others are astonishingly elaborate. Fine lace-like paper is carefully cut into delicate patterns. Bright ribbons decorate folded pages. Tiny painted flowers bloom across elegant borders. Golden lettering catches the light from nearby windows. Each design reflects remarkable craftsmanship. Although many are printed, much of the finishing work is still completed by hand. Imagine holding one of these early Victorian Valentine's cards. The paper feels surprisingly thick. The colors remain soft rather than brilliant. Perhaps there is a painted rose in one corner. Perhaps a pair of doves rests among flowering vines. Inside, a carefully printed verse speaks of admiration, affection, or quiet devotion. To modernize, the language may seem formal, yet behind every sentence lies a familiar desire to let another person know they matter, The Victorian era becomes especially important in the history of Valentine's Day because it transforms a tradition once shared mainly through handwritten letters into something that ordinary people can purchase. This change brings opportunity. It also brings questions. When emotions become easier to express through commercially printed cards, do they become less sincere? Some people certainly thought so. Even during the 19th century, critics worried that buying a ready-made message lacked the personal warmth of writing one's own words. Others disagreed. They believed that even a printed card represented genuine affection if given sincerely. Perhaps both perspectives contain some truth. After all, an object rarely creates meaning by itself. Meaning comes from the intention behind it. A simple handwritten note can become priceless. An expensive gift can feel empty. The heart decides the value, not the price. As factories improve, printed Valentine's cards become more affordable. No longer reserved only for wealthy households, they begin reaching teachers, shopkeepers, craftsmen, clerks, and countless ordinary families. For the first time, millions of people can participate in a shared tradition. Imagine a small village post office during the week before February 14th. The room feels unusually busy. Letters arrive in overflowing bundles. Packages are carefully sorted. The postmaster smiles knowingly as envelope after envelope bears unfamiliar handwriting. Some contain poems. Others hold pressed flowers. Some hide tiny keepsakes wrapped carefully inside folded paper. Excitement quietly spreads. Children wonder whether anyone will remember them. Young adults secretly hope for unexpected messages. Even older couples sometimes exchange gentle notes after decades of marriage. The holiday begins belonging to everyone. Not only poets, not only nobles, not only scholars, ordinary people become its greatest storytellers. Across the Atlantic Ocean, another chapter quietly unfolds. The United States is growing rapidly. New towns appear. Railways stretch across vast landscapes. Immigrants arrive carrying customs from many different countries. Together, these traditions blend into something uniquely American. One remarkable woman helps shape this new chapter. Her name is Esther Howland. Imagine her sitting at a work table covered with colorful paper, ribbons, lace, and delicate illustrations. She studies elegant English Valentine's cards that have recently arrived from overseas. Rather than simply admiring them, she asks herself an important question. Why couldn't beautiful cards be made in America as well? With remarkable creativity and determination, she begins producing decorative Valentine's cards using imported materials and careful craftsmanship. Her designs become increasingly popular. Orders grow larger. What begins as a small creative effort gradually develops into a successful business. For this reason, Esther Howland is often remembered as one of the pioneers of the American Valentine's card industry. Her story reminds us that holidays are shaped not only by ancient legends or famous kings, but also by ordinary individuals whose imagination quietly changes everyday life. Imagine the excitement inside her workshop. Employees arrange delicate lace. Tiny colored images are glued into place. Each finished card feels almost like a small work of art. Some cards unfold into intricate layers. Others contain hidden flaps, revealing additional verses. Receiving one becomes a memorable experience. As postal systems improve further, another tradition quietly grows. Anonymous Valentines. Not every sender signs their name. Sometimes this mystery feels romantic. The recipient wonders who quietly admires them. Perhaps it is someone they already know, perhaps someone too shy to speak openly. For days, curiosity lingers. Yet history has another side as well. Not every anonymous Valentine carries kindness. Some people begin sending humorous or even insulting cards intended to embarrass others. These become known by various names, including vinegar Valentines. Instead of expressing affection, they mock appearance, behavior, or social status. Today, many historians view them as reminders that human traditions often contain both generosity and cruelty. The same holiday capable of encouraging compassion can also reflect society's less admirable qualities. This darker tradition rarely receives as much attention as romantic stories. Yet it forms part of Valentine's complex history. Human beings are wonderfully capable of kindness. They are also capable of thoughtlessness. History asks us to remember both. As evening settles over a Victorian town, gas lamps begin glowing along quiet streets. Snowflakes drift gently through the cold air. Behind frosted windows, families gather around warm fires. Some children proudly show handmade Valentine's cards, decorated with colored pencils and scraps of ribbon. Young couples quietly exchange meaningful glances during family gatherings. An elderly husband places a small bouquet beside his wife's chair without saying a word. After 40 years together, no explanation is needed. Love often becomes quieter with time, not weaker, simply calmer. Perhaps that is one of history's gentlest lessons. The grand declarations celebrated in poems certainly have their place. But lasting affection is often revealed through ordinary moments repeated over many years. A shared breakfast, a warm coat offered during winter, a familiar smile across a crowded room. A letter carefully saved inside a wooden drawer long after its paper begins turning yellow with age. As the 19th century draws toward its close, Valentine's Day has become recognizable in ways that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. Printed cards circulate by the millions. Flowers become increasingly associated with the holiday. Chocolate continues growing in popularity. Postal workers prepare each February for an extraordinary surge of mail. Yet even as the celebration expands, questions remain. Is Valentine's Day primarily about romance, about friendship, about family, about generosity? Or does its meaning change with every person who celebrates it? Perhaps there has never been a single answer. Perhaps the holiday has survived precisely because it allows every generation to rediscover its own understanding of affection. The 20th century now waits just ahead. It will bring world wars, radio, cinema, television, advertising, global businesses, and eventually the internet. Valentine's Day will become larger than ever before. But it will also face its greatest criticism. Many people will begin asking, Whether the celebration has drifted too far from its mysterious origins, that question will accompany us as our journey continues. The story, like history itself, is far from over. The 20th century begins with a quiet sense of possibility. Few people living in the year 1900 could imagine the astonishing events that awaited them. The coming decades would witness breathtaking scientific discoveries, devastating wars, extraordinary inventions, and social changes unlike anything humanity had experienced before. Yet through every triumph and every hardship, people continued searching for the same simple comforts that had always mattered: friendship, family, hope, and love. Imagine yourself walking through a peaceful town on a February morning just before the First World War. The streets are already alive with activity. Shopkeepers arrange fresh flowers outside their doors despite the lingering chill of winter. Bakers place warm loaves into display windows, filling the air with the comforting scent of bread. A postman carrying an unusually heavy leather bag smiles politely as he continues along his familiar route. Inside many of those envelopes are Valentine's cards. Some are colorful, some are beautifully illustrated, some are simple pieces of folded paper with only a few carefully written words. Each one represents a quiet attempt to bridge the distance between two hearts. For generations, people had expressed affection through handwritten letters or poems. Now, thanks to improved printing techniques, attractive cards had become available to nearly everyone. The tradition continued growing, yet history was about to remind humanity that even the warmest celebrations could not exist apart from the larger world. In 1914, Europe was drawn into a conflict that would become known as the First World War. Imagine the silence that settles over a railway station as young soldiers prepare to leave home. Families gather along crowded platforms. Mothers try to hide their tears. Children wave with uncertain smiles. Sweethearts hold hands for a few final moments before the whistle announces departure. No one knows exactly how long the separation will last. Some believe they will return within months. Many never return at all. During these difficult years, letters become more precious than ever. Imagine a soldier sitting quietly inside a small dugout after night has fallen. The distant sound of artillery rolls across the landscape like faraway thunder. A single candle flickers beside him. In his hands rests a letter from home. The paper has traveled hundreds of miles. Its edges are worn from being opened again and again. He reads the familiar handwriting slowly, almost carefully, allowing every sentence to linger in his mind. For a few precious minutes, he is no longer surrounded by mud, fear, and uncertainty. He is home. He remembers the warmth of a family kitchen. He remembers laughter. He remembers someone waiting. Many Valentine's messages exchanged during wartime carried no elaborate poetry. Instead, they expressed something even more meaningful. I hope you are safe. I think of you every day. I cannot wait until we meet again. Simple words, honest words. History reminds us that love often becomes clearest during times of separation. When people cannot be together, every letter becomes a treasure. Every memory becomes brighter. Every promise feels more important. As the war finally comes to an end, the world begins rebuilding itself. Communities mourn enormous losses. Entire generations carry invisible scars. Yet life slowly returns. Children grow into adults. Families are formed. New hopes quietly replace old fears. Valentine's Day remains one small reminder that tenderness still belongs in a world that has witnessed great suffering. During the 1920s and 1930s, cities become increasingly modern. Electric lights brighten streets after sunset. Automobiles replace many horse-drawn carriages. Radio enters family homes. For the first time, millions of people can listen to the same music, news, and stories at exactly the same moment. Imagine a family gathered around a polished wooden radio one winter evening. The room is softly lit. Outside, rain taps gently against the windows. Inside, voices carried invisibly through the air fill the home with music and conversation. The world suddenly feels much smaller. Advertisements also begin reaching larger audiences. Businesses recognize that holidays encourage people to purchase gifts. Valentine's Day slowly becomes linked with chocolates, flowers, jewelry, and greeting cards on a scale never seen before, not because people suddenly begin loving one another more than previous generations, but because modern industry now possesses the ability to produce and distribute these items efficiently. Imagine entering a department store in February during the 1930s. Display windows sparkle with carefully arranged decorations. Boxes of chocolate are stacked neatly beneath ribbons. Fresh flowers brighten otherwise gray winter streets. Rows of elegant cards invite customers to choose the perfect message. For many people, these displays feel exciting. For others, they introduce a new concern. Can genuine affection truly be purchased? This question begins appearing more frequently. Some writers argue that businesses are turning sincere emotions into commercial opportunities. Others respond that gifts have always existed. Flowers were exchanged long before advertisements. Letters required paper purchased from merchants. Even ancient festivals often included offerings and shared meals. Perhaps commerce and celebration have always existed side by side. The debate continues today. There may never be one perfect answer. History suggests that the meaning of a gift depends less upon its cost than upon the thought behind it. A single flower given with sincerity may carry greater value than the most expensive present chosen without care. Then, once again, history changes course. The Second World War begins. Imagine another generation standing beside another railway platform. The scene feels heartbreakingly familiar. Young faces, heavy suitcases, tearful farewells. Hope mixed with uncertainty. Once again, letters become lifelines connecting distant lives. Valentine's Day during wartime often becomes less about celebration and more about reassurance. A postcard saying, "I am safe." A folded photograph carefully tucked inside an envelope. A pressed flower saved between notebook pages. Small reminders that someone, somewhere, continues thinking of another person. Many of these letters survive today in museums and family collections. Reading them is a deeply moving experience. Their language is often gentle, modest, without dramatic speeches. Instead, they reveal ordinary people trying to remain hopeful under extraordinary circumstances. History is filled with famous generals and political leaders. Yet countless unnamed couples, friends, brothers, sisters, and parents quietly carried the emotional weight of those difficult years. Their stories deserve remembrance too. When peace finally returns after 1945, the world begins changing faster than ever before. Television enters homes. Popular music spreads across continents. Films tell unforgettable love stories. International travel becomes increasingly common. Valentine's Day gradually transforms into a celebration recognized far beyond Europe and North America. Different countries embrace the holiday in different ways. Some adopt it enthusiastically. Others blend it with older local customs. Some remain uncertain about it for many decades. History rarely moves uniformly. Every culture adapts new traditions according to its own values. Imagine a flower grower preparing roses before dawn. Hundreds of blossoms fill the greenhouse with delicate fragrance. Each flower represents hours of patient care. Some will travel only a few streets away. Others will cross oceans before reaching their destination. Global transportation has made remarkable journeys possible. By the second half of the 20th century, Valentine's Day is no longer simply a regional observance. It has become an international event. Television advertisements encourage gift-giving. Magazines publish romantic stories. Schools organize card exchanges among children. Restaurants prepare special evening meals. The celebration continues expanding. Yet amid all this growth, quieter traditions survive. A husband still writes a handwritten note after decades of marriage. A grandmother sends affectionate cards to grandchildren. Friends exchange small gifts simply to express appreciation. Not every Valentine concerns romance. Kindness itself remains worth celebrating. As evening falls somewhere in the late 20th century, city lights shimmer beneath the winter sky. Cars replace horses. Aeroplanes cross continents overhead. Telephones connect families instantly. The world feels unimaginably different from ancient Rome, where our journey first began. Yet if you listen carefully, beneath all the technology and modern convenience, you may still hear something wonderfully familiar. Someone choosing careful words. Someone hoping another person smiles. Someone quietly saying in one way or another, "You matter to me." Across nearly 2,000 years, that simple message has never truly changed. The 21st century now waits just ahead, bringing the internet, smartphones, social media, online shopping, and entirely new questions about what Valentine's Day means in an increasingly connected world. The story continues. The 21st century arrives almost without ceremony. There is no single sunrise that announces humanity has entered a new age. The seasons continue their familiar rhythm. Winter still gives way to spring. Birds still return after long migrations. Flowers still bloom despite the cold that came before. Nature follows its timeless patterns, even as human life changes more rapidly than ever. Imagine waking early on a February morning somewhere in the modern world. Before your feet even touch the floor, countless messages have already traveled across continents. A phone resting quietly beside the bed begins to glow. Someone has sent a greeting from another country. Another message arrives from a lifelong friend. A family member shares a photograph. A reminder appears about Valentine's Day. Within only a few seconds, words have crossed oceans that once required months of dangerous travel. It is an astonishing transformation. The Roman messenger riding along dusty roads. The medieval monk carefully copying manuscripts. The Victorian postman carrying heavy sacks of letters. None of them could possibly imagine a world where affection travels almost at the speed of light. And yet beneath the extraordinary technology, the human desire remains almost unchanged. People still hope to be remembered. They still wonder whether someone is thinking about them. They still search for ways to express emotions that often seem larger than language itself. The methods have changed. The feelings have not. Imagine opening a social media application on Valentine's Day. The screen fills with photographs, bouquets of flowers, boxes of chocolate. Couples smiling together beneath soft evening lights. Children proudly displaying handmade cards. Friends sharing old memories. Restaurants decorated with candles. Cities illuminated in shades of red and gold. At first glance, it appears that the entire world is celebrating exactly the same holiday. But history reminds us to look more carefully. Not everyone celebrates Valentine's Day. Not every culture understands it in the same way. Not every country embraced the tradition at the same moment. As the holiday spread across the globe during the 20th and 21st centuries, different societies reshaped it according to their own customs, beliefs, and traditions. Imagine traveling quietly across continents. In one country, Valentine's Day is mainly associated with romantic partners. In another, close friends exchange thoughtful gifts. Elsewhere, families include parents and children in the celebration. Some cultures have developed entirely unique customs that differ greatly from those found in Europe or North America. History has always worked this way. Traditions rarely remain exactly as they began. They adapt. They grow. They absorb local colors, languages, and values. Rather than replacing older customs, they often settle gently beside them. This flexibility may explain why Valentine's Day has survived for so many centuries. It has never belonged to only one culture. It has constantly evolved. Yet with worldwide popularity comes increasing debate. Imagine sitting quietly inside a small cafe on a rainy February afternoon. Outside, shoppers hurry through crowded streets, carrying brightly colored gift bags. Large shop windows display expensive jewelry, luxury watches, perfumes, flowers, and beautifully wrapped chocolates. Advertisements appear almost everywhere. Show your love. Buy the perfect gift. Don't miss this special day. The messages are impossible to ignore. Some people enjoy this atmosphere. They see it as a joyful excuse to celebrate. Others feel something very different. They begin asking an important question. Has Valentine's Day become too commercial? It is a question heard almost every year. Historians often smile gently when discussing it, not because the concern is unimportant, but because similar conversations have existed for well over a century. Even during the Victorian era, people worried that ready-made Valentine's cards might replace heartfelt personal letters. Long before online shopping, critics wondered whether businesses were benefiting too much from romance. In many ways, each generation has repeated the same conversation. Perhaps this tells us something interesting. The tension between sincere emotion and commercial celebration is not uniquely modern. It has accompanied Valentine's Day throughout much of its recent history. Still, the holiday refuses to become only about buying things. Imagine a primary school classroom during the week before February 14th. Children sit around large tables covered with colored paper, safety scissors, glue, and crayons. Tiny hands carefully cut hearts from folded paper. Someone draws flowers. Another child writes in slightly uneven handwriting, "Thank you for being my friend." These cards are not expensive. Some cost almost nothing to create. Yet they often become treasured keepsakes. Why? Because children are remarkably honest. Their gifts rarely concern price. They simply wish to make another person smile. Perhaps adults sometimes forget that lesson. Imagine an elderly couple living quietly together after 50 years of marriage. The excitement of youth has long since softened into something calmer. There is no need for grand speeches. One partner quietly prepares tea before the other wakes. A favorite blanket is placed beside a comfortable chair. A familiar hand reaches across the table. Years of shared experience speak more clearly than elaborate declarations ever could. When asked about love, many couples who have spent decades together rarely describe dramatic moments. Instead, they remember ordinary kindness, waiting patiently, listening carefully, forgiving quickly, remaining present during difficult times. History often celebrates extraordinary romances. Real life is usually built from countless ordinary acts of care. As evening approaches in cities around the world, restaurants become busier. Some couples celebrate engagements. Others celebrate anniversaries. Some simply enjoy spending uninterrupted time together after busy weeks. Elsewhere, friends gather for laughter rather than romance. Families share meals. Parents read bedtime stories to children before placing homemade Valentine's cards upon bedroom shelves. The holiday means different things to different people. Perhaps it always has. At the same time, the internet introduces entirely new forms of connection. Imagine two friends separated by thousands of miles. One lives where snow covers the streets. The other watches warm ocean waves beneath a brilliant afternoon sun. Centuries ago, they might never have met. Today, they exchange greetings within seconds. Distance, once one of humanity's greatest barriers, has become far less powerful. Technology has not replaced affection. It simply offered new ways to express it. Yet another conversation quietly grows louder each year. Some people feel lonely on Valentine's Day. Advertisements often focus almost entirely upon couples. Those who are single sometimes feel overlooked. Historians remind us that this understanding of Valentine's Day is surprisingly recent. Across much of its long history, the celebration included friendship, family affection, admiration, and community alongside romantic relationships. Perhaps remembering that broader history helps restore balance. Love has many forms. The loyalty between lifelong friends, the quiet devotion of parents, the kindness shown to neighbors, the gratitude felt toward teachers, the companionship of grandparents, even simple acts of generosity offered to complete strangers. Human history would look very different without these quieter expressions of care. Imagine walking through a city park just before sunset. Children laugh while feeding birds. An elderly man quietly places flowers beside a memorial bench dedicated to his late wife. Nearby, volunteers distribute warm meals to people experiencing hardship. A young musician plays gentle melodies beneath bare winter trees. None of these moments appear in advertisements, yet each reflects something deeply connected to the spirit many people hope Valentine's Day represents: compassion, generosity, remembering another person's humanity. As darkness slowly settles across the modern world, millions of tiny lights appear. Street lamps, apartment windows, cars moving through quiet neighborhoods, phones glowing softly in waiting hands. Somewhere a message is being written. Elsewhere someone pauses before pressing send, wondering whether the words are enough. That hesitation has existed for centuries. The tools have changed from parchment to paper, from ink to keyboards. The uncertainty remains wonderfully familiar. Will they understand? Will they smile? Will these words matter? Those questions connect us with countless generations stretching back through history. And now, as our long journey approaches its final chapters, we leave behind the modern celebrations and begin looking more closely at the myths, misunderstandings, forgotten legends, and surprising truths that continue surrounding Valentine's Day. Some stories are beautifully romantic, and others are far darker than most people realize. Some have been repeated so often that they are accepted as fact despite very little historical evidence. The closer we look, the more fascinating the mystery becomes. As our journey has carried us across nearly 2,000 years, one truth has quietly followed us through every century. History is rarely as simple as a legend. The stories people love most are often polished by generations of retelling. Small details become larger. Uncertain events become absolute facts. Ordinary people slowly become legendary figures. Over time, memory and imagination begin walking side by side until even careful historians must pause before deciding where one ends and the other begins. Tonight, we arrive at perhaps the most mysterious part of Valentine's history. Not because it contains dragons or hidden treasures, but because so much of what millions of people confidently believe may never have happened exactly as it is commonly told. Imagine yourself inside a vast medieval library. The room is wonderfully quiet. Dust floats gently through narrow beams of afternoon sunlight. Shelves stretch from floor to ceiling, holding handwritten manuscripts copied over hundreds of years. Some books are beautifully preserved. Others have missing pages, faded ink, or broken bindings. A historian carefully opens one ancient manuscript. The pages crackle softly. The handwriting is elegant but difficult to read. Every sentence raises another question. Who wrote this? When? How close were they to the events they describe? Could they have misunderstood an earlier source? These are the questions historians ask every day. Unlike storytellers, historians are often comfortable saying, "We do not know." In fact, those three words are among the most honest phrases in historical research. Many people imagine that Valentine's Day can be traced neatly back to one single individual. A priest named Valentine, a courageous man secretly performing marriages, an emperor who banned love, a farewell letter signed from your Valentine. It is a beautiful story. It has inspired books, films, poems, and countless conversations. Yet when historians search for contemporary evidence, certainty becomes surprisingly difficult to find. Imagine trying to assemble a puzzle after someone has hidden half the pieces. Some sections fit together perfectly. Others leave frustrating gaps. You can recognize parts of the picture. You simply cannot see all of it. That is exactly how early Christian history often appears. Records from the 3rd century are incomplete. Many documents disappeared through war, decay, fire, or simple neglect. Later generations attempted to preserve earlier memories, but memories naturally change over time. Stories become richer. Details become more dramatic. Characters become more symbolic. This does not necessarily mean the stories are false. It simply means historians must distinguish between what can be demonstrated and what has become tradition. One of the most famous legends concerns Emperor Claudius II. According to popular retellings, he believed unmarried soldiers fought more effectively than married ones. Therefore, he supposedly forbade young men from marrying. Valentine, refusing to obey such an unjust command, secretly performed marriage ceremonies for loving couples. Eventually, he was discovered, arrested, imprisoned, and executed. It is an unforgettable narrative. Courage standing against authority, love triumphing over fear, faith remaining steadfast even before death. Understandably, people have treasured this story for centuries. Yet modern historians ask careful questions. Is there reliable evidence that Claudius actually issued such a universal marriage ban? No surviving law confirms it. Ancient writers, living close to that period, never clearly describe such a decree. The story itself appears much later. That does not automatically prove it impossible. History sometimes loses important records. But responsible scholarship avoids presenting uncertain traditions as unquestionable fact. Imagine sitting beside an elderly storyteller during a winter evening. He tells a tale passed down through his grandparents. They heard it from their grandparents before them. The story feels ancient, meaningful, beloved. Yet over hundreds of years, every storyteller has added a small detail. A dramatic pause, a memorable phrase, perhaps an extra conversation, perhaps a miracle, none intended to deceive, simply to help listeners remember. By the time the tale reaches us, separating original memory from later imagination becomes nearly impossible. Human beings have always shaped stories this way. Valentine's legends follow the same path. Another famous tradition tells of Valentine healing the blind daughter of his jailer. Imagine the quiet prison cell. Stone walls remain cool even during daylight. Outside, guards continue their ordinary routines. Inside, according to later accounts, the imprisoned Christian prays with remarkable calm. The jailer's daughter visits. A miracle occurs. Her sight is restored. The story radiates hope. Whether every detail happened exactly as described cannot be confirmed. Still, the legend reveals what later Christians admired: compassion, faith, mercy, courage. History often teaches values through stories, even when every historical detail remains uncertain. Then comes perhaps the most famous phrase of all. From your Valentine. Millions of cards still end with these words. According to tradition, Valentine signed a farewell message this way before his execution. It is difficult to imagine a more fitting origin for a holiday centered upon affectionate messages. Yet once again, certainty proves elusive. No original letter survives. The earliest references appear long after the event supposedly occurred. The phrase may preserve genuine memory, or it may have developed gradually through centuries of storytelling. We simply cannot know with complete confidence. And perhaps that uncertainty invites us to appreciate history rather than simplify it. Imagine archaeologists uncovering fragments of an ancient mosaic. Most pieces remain buried. Only sections appear. A face here, a hand there, part of a beautiful landscape. They carefully reconstruct what they can while honestly acknowledging what remains missing. That is responsible history, not claiming certainty where evidence remains incomplete, but allowing mystery to remain part of the story. Interestingly, Valentine's Day is not the only holiday surrounded by misunderstood origins. Many celebrations people consider ancient have changed dramatically across centuries. Customs merge. Religious traditions overlap with seasonal festivals. Local practices influence national celebrations. New meanings quietly replace older ones. Human culture has always evolved. Imagine a river flowing toward the sea. Tiny streams join from every direction. Mountain springs, forest creeks, gentle rainfall. Eventually, the water becomes impossible to separate into its original sources. Valentine's Day resembles that river. Ancient Roman festivals, early Christian remembrance, medieval poetry, courtly love, Victorian greeting cards, modern commerce, global communication. Every generation has added another stream, trying to identify one single beginning oversimplifies a beautifully complex history. Another widespread misunderstanding concerns the heart symbol itself. Many people assume the familiar heart shape has always represented the human heart. Curiously, the actual human heart looks quite different. Artists gradually developed the symbol over centuries. Some scholars suggest it may have been influenced by plant forms, stylized leaves, or artistic conventions rather than careful anatomical observation. Others continue debating its precise development. Whatever its origin, the symbol became instantly recognizable, long before people possessed detailed medical knowledge about the heart's true appearance. History often values symbolism over perfect accuracy. The heart shape communicates emotion. That has always mattered more than biological precision. Imagine a medieval artist illuminating a manuscript. He is not creating a medical textbook. He is expressing beauty, meaning, hope. Symbols speak a language different from science. Both have their place. As evening slowly approaches, imagine returning once more to ancient Rome, where our journey first began. The city no longer appears exactly as it did. Centuries have passed before your eyes. Temples became churches. Empires disappeared. Languages evolved. Roads remained. The names of kings faded into dusty manuscripts. Yet people continued searching for companionship. Parents continued loving children. Friends continued comforting one another. Couples continued building lives together despite uncertain futures. That continuity may be the most remarkable part of Valentine's history. Not the legends, not the gifts, not even the holiday itself, but the quiet persistence of human affection across every age. Still, one final chapter remains, perhaps the darkest chapter of all. For behind every celebration lies another reality: loneliness, loss, commercial pressure, misunderstanding, the gap between expectation and reality. To understand Valentine's Day completely, we must gently explore those shadows as well. Only then can we appreciate the holiday in all its complicated humanity. Our journey is almost complete. As our long journey slowly approaches its end, the evening grows quiet once again. Imagine yourself standing on a gentle hill, overlooking no particular city and every city at once. Behind you lie the ruins of ancient Rome. Somewhere beyond the horizon rest medieval monasteries where patient monks copied fading manuscripts by candlelight. Farther still are Renaissance workshops filled with painters and poets, Victorian printing houses humming with heavy presses, crowded railway stations where lovers exchanged tearful farewells, and finally the bright lights of our modern world glowing beneath countless windows and illuminated screens. Nearly 2,000 years have passed during our journey. Empires have risen. Empires have fallen. Languages have changed. Borders have shifted. Entire civilizations have disappeared into history. Yet something remarkably familiar has remained. Human beings have continued searching for connection. Perhaps that has always been the true story of Valentine's Day. Not a single saint, not a single festival, not a single legend, but humanity's endless attempt to remind one another that no one wishes to feel entirely alone. And yet, if we are honest, there is another side to this story. Every celebration casts a shadow. Every tradition carries both beauty and misunderstanding. Valentine's Day is no different. Imagine walking through a busy shopping district in early February. Bright decorations fill every window. Hearts appear everywhere. Music drifts softly through the air. Advertisements promise that the perfect gift will create the perfect memory. The displays are beautiful, carefully designed, hopeful. But somewhere among the crowds walks someone who recently lost the person they loved. Another quietly wonders why everyone else seems happier than they are. Another cannot afford expensive gifts. Another lives far from family. Another spends the day working while others celebrate. History rarely speaks about these people, yet they have always existed. Even in medieval villages, there were widows who remembered happier years. There were soldiers separated from home. There were young people whose affection was never returned. There were parents mourning children. There were elderly people whose lifelong companions had already passed away. Love has always carried the possibility of loss, because to love someone is also to accept that life offers no permanent guarantees. Perhaps that sounds sad, yet history suggests something surprisingly hopeful. People continued loving anyway, generation after generation, century after century, despite wars, despite disease, despite uncertainty, despite knowing that every relationship carries risk. That quiet courage may be one of humanity's greatest achievements. Imagine an elderly woman opening a small wooden box that has remained carefully protected for decades. Inside rests an old Valentine. Its paper has become yellow with age. The corners are gently worn. The ink has faded almost beyond reading. To anyone else, it appears ordinary. To her, it contains an entire lifetime. She remembers the snowy afternoon when it arrived. She remembers the nervous smile of the young man who handed it to her. She remembers the years they built together, the children they raised, the challenges they overcame, the ordinary evenings that slowly became extraordinary simply because they were shared. The card itself is no longer important. The memories are. History often preserves great monuments built from stone. Human hearts preserve invisible monuments built from memory. No archaeologist can uncover them. No museum can display them fully, yet they shape lives just as profoundly. As our understanding of history has grown, scholars have also become increasingly careful about separating evidence from legend. Rather than reducing Valentine's Day to one simple origin, they now describe it as a tradition that evolved gradually through centuries of cultural change. Ancient Roman customs may have influenced later celebrations in certain ways. Early Christian remembrance certainly played an important role. Medieval literature connected February with romance. Victorian industry transformed private traditions into public customs. Modern technology carried those customs around the globe. Every era added another chapter. Perhaps this complexity makes the story even more beautiful. Real history rarely follows straight lines. It twists gently through time like a winding river. Sometimes clear, sometimes mysterious, always moving forward. Imagine returning one final time to the ancient streets where our journey first began. The marketplaces have fallen silent. Evening settles over worn stone roads. The voices of merchants have faded into memory. The temples are quiet. Somewhere nearby, a small Christian community gathers in prayer, unaware that centuries later people around the world will remember a mysterious figure named Valentine. They cannot imagine greeting cards, chocolate, bouquets wrapped in colorful paper, digital messages traveling through invisible networks. Nor could they imagine millions of people asking whether Valentine's Day has become too commercial. History always surprises those living within it. No generation knows which ordinary customs will become extraordinary traditions. The people simply live. And later generations give meaning to what remains. If there is one lesson that quietly echoes across every century we have visited, perhaps it is this: the greatest expressions of affection have rarely depended upon wealth. The most memorable gifts were not always the most expensive. A carefully written letter, a flower gathered during an early morning walk, a promise faithfully kept, a hand offered during difficult times, a quiet conversation beside a warm fire, a familiar voice saying, "I'm here." History repeatedly reminds us that these simple acts outlast almost everything else. The great palaces of kings have crumbled. Ancient empires disappeared. Magnificent statues lost their faces. Libraries burned. Yet countless anonymous acts of kindness continued shaping the world without ever appearing in history books. Perhaps they were always the true foundation of civilization. Imagine one final winter evening. Snow falls gently beyond the window. A single candle burns quietly upon a wooden table. Someone reaches for a blank sheet of paper. For a long moment, they simply think. What should they write? How can a few words possibly express everything they hope another person understands? Eventually, the pen begins moving. Slowly, carefully, honestly. Perhaps that simple scene has repeated itself millions of times across history. Different languages, different centuries, different cultures, the same quiet hope that another human being will read those words and feel just a little less alone. Long before Valentine's Day became a global celebration, long before shops filled with red decorations, long before chocolates arrived in heart-shaped boxes, long before roses traveled across continents, there was simply one person reaching out to another. And perhaps beneath every tradition added across the centuries, that remains the holiday's oldest heartbeat. Not perfection, not grand romance, not expensive gifts, but remembrance, gratitude, compassion, connection. The dark history of Valentine's Day is not dark because it began with mystery, uncertain legends, political change, or forgotten festivals. Its darkness lies in reminding us that love has always existed beside sacrifice, separation, loneliness, war, grief, and uncertainty. Yet every generation chose hope anyway. They continued writing letters, and they continued planting flowers. They continued composing poems. They continued believing that kindness was worth sharing. That may be the most remarkable inheritance history has given us. As the night grows deeper and the world outside becomes wonderfully quiet, our journey finally comes to an end. The roads of ancient Rome fade gently into darkness. The candles inside medieval monasteries slowly burn low. The songs of wandering poets grow distant. Victorian printing presses fall silent. The last train disappears into the evening mist. Modern city lights shimmer softly beneath the stars. Across every century we have visited, countless voices seem to whisper the same timeless truth. History changes. Civilizations change. Traditions change. But the human heart, in all its hope, vulnerability, courage, and quiet longing for connection, remains beautifully familiar. And with that gentle thought, our long walk through the hidden history of Valentine's Day comes peacefully to its close.